Hi everybody, it's Julie, and in this month's newsletter, I'm going to be playing with making my own DIY rainbow ink pad as well as the Hero Arts Ombre ink pads, which are so awesome. And I'm going to start by taking the blank Kaleidocolor ink pads. Rainbow pads were kind of popular years ago, and now they're coming back in. And what's awesome is that you can make your own with these uninked ink pads. And they have a felt pad with a linen top, and they're going to work the best with these water-based dye type re-inkers. And I'm using the distress re-inkers here to make a custom rainbow of colors that I'm just really into lately. This is Squeeze Lemonade, and I'm just using the dropper tool to apply the ink. And with these Kaleidocolor pads, the pads are separated for storage, and then when you're ready to use the pad, you'll push the lever and bring the pads together. But for right now, for re-inking those little pads, it's going to help to keep them separated right now. So I'm bringing in some of that gorgeous new coral that they just released. And I also have at the very end some cracked pistachio that's going to go on there. And one thing I noticed while I was inking these pads up is at first the ink is going to sink down there really fast, because this is a dye ink and the pad's dry and thirsty, of course. But once the ink quits sinking down and it starts sitting up on the top surface of the pad, you've inked it. And here you can see I've got a pool of ink sitting there on the surface, and I've probably over inked it. And after I let it sit overnight, because I think it's a good idea to let the ink pad absorb it, I did have some excess ink I had to blot off with a paper towel. Now here I also made another one. This is more of an ombre in shades of blue using Memento dye re-inkers. And you'll see there I got overzealous there with the re-inkers. So just a word to the wise, when the ink starts to sit up on top of the surface, you've got plenty of ink on there. So now you want to make sure when you ink up your stamp, you're not going against the direction of the ink pad. You're going in the same direction as the divisions of those ink pads. And I've snapped the lever, or I pushed the lever, so it snaps all those pads together to give me a nice, all the pads are butted up against each other. And then when I rub up and down and then tapping is going to blend it. So I'm going to go rub up and down across the same, moving in the same direction as the divisions of those pads, and then tap up and down just to blend where the edges meet. And then I get a nice, beautiful ombre effect. And then I'm going to snap those apart for storage and put the lid on, and it won't let you put the lid on until you snap them apart. So that's kind of cool. So here we go again. I've got my rainbow pad again with those distress ink colors that I made, and my stamp is actually longer than the pad itself, and that's okay. You can just take a longer stamp and angle it a little bit, and then you can get full coverage onto your stamp. And again, I use the same direction, I inked up in the same direction as the pads are divided, and then tapped to blend where the edges meet. And then to put the pad away, I'm just going to go ahead and snap those apart. Now for the ombre ink pad, those are not, you're not able to separate those. They are permanently secured right there the way they are, but those colors are in a really cool ombre pattern that kind of, they all blend really well together. So you don't have to really worry about keeping those separated, because they aren't a high contrasting color. They all blend, one to the next really beautifully. But it's the same thing as the Kaleidocolor pad, but the pads are divided the opposite direction. So you want to rotate your pad so that when you're applying the ink to that stamp, you're going in the direction of those divisions there between the colors. So I thought it would be fun after I did that to see what would happen if I took an acrylic block and inked it up on my rainbow pad and then misted it with water to get kind of a background effect with the ink smooshing technique made famous by Laura Basson. And this turned out really awesome, although I was a little bit concerned I didn't spritz quite enough water on there. But because this is a water-based ink, you cannot use pigment inks on these ink pads. You have to use a water-based dye type ink. Pigment ink is too thick. But here you can see where I actually heat set it, and it was all fine. The colors just kind of blended really nicely on there, and it didn't matter that I didn't have quite enough water. But there was enough ink left over on the block to go ahead and spritz it a second time with water and see what I could get from the leftover ink. And the colors aren't going to be as intense, of course, as the first impression was, but that's okay. I really liked how it just created kind of this really cool abstract multicolored background, and I did get a little bit of mud there because of the extra water, but I just blotted that up with a clean paper towel, and I think it makes a really pretty pastel background that I could stamp over the top of. So I'm going to save that for a future project. And then one more thing I wanted to try was taking a brayer. And when I'm inking a brayer on a rainbow pad like this, I like to keep the pads separated. And yes, there are gaps in between the colors, but this will span the whole width of the rubber brayer. And when you're inking up the brayer, you're actually going to use a motion where you lift and then roll down onto the ink pad, lift and roll, so that you're completing the rotation of the brayer to get all the ink on there. So I do this really fast, and then I roll it across my paper. And like the block and the rubber stamps I was using before, I'm going to roll that brayer across the rainbow pad in the same direction as the pad divisions. And because I'm lifting and rolling each time against that ink pad, even though it doesn't look like it, looks like I'm going back and forth, but I'm actually lifting and rolling. Every time I come down, it's never gonna be in the exact same spot. So where the colors are separated, they will start to blend together, and I won't have any gaps when I start brayering onto my paper surface. And here you can see just the fun results you can get with these really cool custom rainbow pads and the Hero Arts Ombre pad there. And all the supplies are listed in the In Touch newsletter archive at the blog, and everything I used here is available at ellenhudson.com. Thanks for watching.